What does it mean to be? With this simple question, Heidegger's thinking path sets in. This is how it initiates. And it is his question from the beginning whether we are at all perplexed still by this very question or not. There's an echo in Heidegger that stretches back 2,500 years to Plato, to an unheard echo, a concealed echo, a thought that remained hidden, concealed, unquestioned through the eons of what has become philosophy. On the first page of Being in Time, Heidegger quotes from Plato's Sophists. That means from the dialogue that addresses those who attempt to destroy the access to the world with their games of trying to win an argument, etc. They impede, they make impossible an access to being and to world. And here Plato says, do we at all know what we mean with the word being or to be? And Heidegger asks, are we at all perplexed today by this very question? And from the beginning, this is how Heidegger begins, how he has to begin. He takes on this unheard echo from Plato and he takes it up, and his thinking path really ignites with Aletheia. And it will be in my course on Heidegger, the question of being, that we will try to give a response to the question of being. The enrollment for the course is now open, and if you follow the link down below, you'll find all details that you need to have, and I'll mention a bit about this at the end of this video also, what it is that you can sign up for. On the first page then, on the first chapter, the first proper chapter of Being in Time, Heidegger speaks of the gigantomachia perites usias, the gigantic battle for the meaning of being, which we have lost sight of. But there is always, Heidegger thinks, a gigantic battle for what it means to be. We are always already deciding, pre-theoretically, pre-ontologically often enough, whether something is, what something is, what is, and what is not. It is in the little word is, Heidegger thinks, that the entire fate of the history of being is contained. And I would now like to read from my book on Heidegger, an attempt at a response. For Heidegger, the human being is always on a rich walk between light and dark, hiking through the fissures of the mountain range of the tide of being. Through death, at any moment, mortals can fall off the edge and become great destroyers. To provide so that there can be a good death is thus the task of mortals. For there to be a good death rather than a destructive, all-eradicating death on a planetary scale, or a lonely death of those isolated and without community. We are to become mortal, capable of death as death, open to death. And that means to be forever mindful of the darkness at work in history and the inherent danger from which at once the saving grace can arise. Becoming mindful of this is possible not only for those few and rare who come through the thinking the unsupported and unsafeguarded. No, it's for all those who dwell in the sense of keeping, protecting and caring, where this sense of dwelling becomes attainable precisely because of one's mindfulness of the inherent withdrawal of being, the impossibility to make available and reify what is. If the response to being means to become mortal, that means to be able to let go, to not reify what is, but to let something show itself of itself. But this also means to reconnect, to stretch back for being, which is the old, that which was, as Aristotle says in the Metaphysics, to on what is being, or as he says, toti en enai, that which was being. To begin to remember what has been. for that which has been lies concealed and waits to be discovered and now thought to return into the origin. It is the experience of withdrawal, together with the movement of aletheia and of ecstatic time, which show us why Heidegger speaks of the turning of being and of being as occurring essentially. I have argued that truth as aletheia is pivotal for the turn in Heidegger's thought. By way of aletheia, Heidegger, and this is where Heidegger ignites. Heidegger ignites as a thinker, as you will see in the course. He ignites as a thinker through his retranslation of aletheia as unconcealment. So you can see, Heidegger begins to see what was at the edge of what metaphysics was not able to think, and what is now beginning to be, we are now beginning to be able to think and to attain. And so there is a possibility, many possibilities to find responses to the question of being. And perhaps it's in Heidegger's lecture course, Was heißt denken, which is usually translated as what is thinking, or what is called thinking, or perhaps better called what calls us for to think, what calls upon us to think, and what does thinking mean to us, where he begins with, this was the last lecture course Heidegger gave in the 1950s on Parmenides, where Heidegger tries to establish not the unity of being and thought, because there is a schism between Sein und Denken, between being and thinking, but how they belong together and come together. Here's how he begins his lecture course. We come to know what it means to think when we ourselves try to think. Sapere aude. Have courage to think for yourself. If the attempt is to be successful, we must be ready to learn thinking. As soon as we allow ourselves to become involved in such learning, we have admitted that we are not yet open to thinking. Yet the human being is called the being who can think, and rightly so. Man is the rational animal. Reason, ratio, evolves in thinking. Being the rational animal, man must be capable of thinking if he really wants to. Still, it may be that man wants to think, but cannot. Perhaps he wants too much when he wants to think, and so can do too little. Man can think in the sense that he is open to the likelihood to do so. This liking, this being addressed by thinking itself, is no guarantee that we are indeed just capable of thinking. For we are capable of doing only what we are inclined to do. We must be addressed by it. And we must let ourselves be addressed. And again, we truly incline only towards something that in turn inclines towards us, toward our being in our core. What keeps us in our essential nature holds us only so long, however, as we, for our part, keep holding on to what holds us, and we keep holding on to it by not letting it out of our memory. Memory is the gathering of thought, the thought of what holds us, and that we give it thought precisely because it remains what must be thought about. And it is also in this lecture course quite early on that Heidegger tells us about this and gives us an example of the difference between scientific representation and thinking. The scientific mode of representation looks at a tree and sees only, for example, atoms or neurons shooting around in our brains. Or we could, as he says, leap. Take a leap. A very simple leap. A leap in front of this specific tree which is in front of us. And introduce ourselves to the tree and let that tree introduce itself without any framing. Let the tree introduce, lead us into, introducere, and thereby let something show in and of itself of this specific tree. And we begin to see, perhaps, here, this very humble approach to thinking in Heidegger, which, however, is for us, even though it is as Heidegger himself says, very simple. Incredibly difficult, because we want to attack the tree, but the tree is made up of matter, and it is made up of atoms, and it is actually not even made up of atoms, because it's all just energy. We are incapable, often enough, to release ourselves from all the different framings that we are in. And this is how, very often, Gestell operates. So Gestell, as you will see in the course, is not so much about technological tools or machines or anything like this, but is the layers upon layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of framings that impede and encrust and make almost impossible any genuine original access to what there is. So that a phenomena can show itself, which then of course through philosophy and through poetry must be safeguarded and kept securely, which is exactly what the sciences are trying to do with their models and their experiments. They're trying to corroborate what is, right? The human being is genetic code, for example, that's corroborated, which is a very, very simplistic metaphysics. It determines the beingness of the human being as genetic code and then takes this to be a timeless substance. So in the course, we will begin, of course, where it begins, in being and time, with the analytic of Dasein, and how Heidegger ignites as a thinker with two moments are most important, I think. His response to Descartes that the human being finds meaning only insofar as he's mortally finite, but also because Heidegger retranslates aletheia as unconcealment, simultaneity, together with ecstatic time, as I mentioned before. This is how Heidegger ignites as a thinker, and it begins in being and time. We then move into this tremendous, terrifying realm of the Ereignis to which the history of metaphysics has always responded, but could never see what is really at stake and active, which is being itself in its epochs. Epochal in Greek means holding back. It's being holding itself back. But to be able to think this holding back, withdrawal, that's now the art and the task in order to get into this other beginning of which Heidegger speaks, which will be another topic that we'll be discussing, the other beginning. Then we will discuss technology, Gestell, which I translate as positionality, the concentration of positing and positioning and demanding and wanting and willing. A will to will that is blind and that circles around itself, but where beings, including the human being, are challenged forth so as to stand ready as a standing reserve. Where, in fact, nothing ever begins to show itself, because Heidegger's example is wine. Wine is now an aggregate, liquid. It is no longer a gift from the gods and from the earth, which is cherished by mortals. It is an aggregate liquid, which is an attack on the specific wine, but of course which allows capitalist reproduction. And this is how Heidegger understands that metaphysics works itself through technology. And in the ultimate lecture, we'll then turn to poetic language, to Heidegger's poets, to Rilke, Stefan George, Hölderlin, but also to dialect and vernacular, and to thinkers like Ossip Mandelstam as well, who was quite close to Heidegger's thought as well. We'll talk about the danger of language. As Hölderlin says, language is the most dangerous good given to mortals by the gods. And it is through language that the world moves, and it is of course language itself that can be corrupted and turned into informational value, etc. also. But to follow Goethe, as Heidegger does, as soon as deeper, more fundamental questions, issues are at stake, a different language comes to the fore, and that is poetic language. It is in poetry that the world can still light up. And it is in poetic thought that the phenomena the original primordial phenomena, can be safeguarded and kept. So the course will be on Dasein, being in time, Ereignis, technology, and poetic language. And you can sign up for 3 different tiers. I just mentioned this very briefly. The first one is for the self-learner, so whenever you have the time, you sign up for this and you do the course at your own pace. You get access to all course materials. You can do this whenever you want. The second tier is with seminars. Seminars will start soon. You'll find it on the website when. We'll meet for 7 Sundays, 2.5 hours for each meeting. We'll meet up in a group, usually somewhere between 15 to 30 people or so. And so I lead the sessions, and you can then discuss in breakout sessions and with me the questions that arise for you from the readings and from the lectures. And there's a higher tier still where you can book additional private tutorials with me, which is I think probably only necessary for someone who's working towards a specific goal. For example, if you're writing a book or an article, or you're setting up your own independent scholarship or so, then this probably is a good idea for you. So if you have any questions on the course, please just leave a comment. If you know anyone who might be interested in a course on Heidegger, feel free to share the video with them. So thank you very much indeed. I see you inside being and time. We collapse time into being, and we see how the ecstasies of time allow us perhaps not to predict the future, that would be a bit ridiculous, but to begin to see how the tidal waves of what has been is weaving and striving, weaving themselves through the present and into that which is to come. And sometimes perhaps we can pick up on a certain whisper and see the turnings of history before they occur. So I hope to see you in the course. Thank you very much. And as people sometimes ask how they can support the channel and support my work, the best way to support is really by enrolling in one of my courses. So thank you very much indeed.